Hey, welcome to my channel. I'm RPM, and today we cover how do we form a test-driven development habit. Let's start with what test-driven development is all about. I'm sure most of you know this already, but I'm just going to give a quick primer so that we are all on the same page. Test-driven development in a nutshell is this. You start with writing a test, and then you fix the test, and then you refactor. That's it. Those are the three key things that you do with a test-driven development cycle, and you do this over and over and over again. You have a big problem, you break it down into multiple instances of that problem, and you solve each instance of that problem one step at a time. Okay, and doing that, going into this loop over and over again is what test-driven development is all about, right? There are variations of test-driven development. Some are like write test first and then there could be test after. In this specific talk, we are going to cover about purely test before type of style, wherein we write the test first before actually writing the production code. Okay, so how to make TDD a habit? Before that, like, what is the motivation of making a TDD habit? TDD has a lot of benefits in terms of how do you divide the problem space into multiple instances and then solving them one by one, which makes problem solving very, very easy. And as a side effect of TDD, you get really well written tests that target the behavior over specific implementation, which means that you wouldn't really have small tests for each function, which you tend to do like test after development style, but you will end up with a lot of behavioral tests because essentially you are writing tests for behaviors you expect from the system. So given that we have benefits, I think it is worth making TDD a habit. And in this talk, we'll cover about how to make TDD a habit using a behavioral model called the hooked model, which was popularized by Nir Eyal in his book by the same name. But at the same time, this model was also shown previously by Charles Duhigg in his book, The Power of Habit. The only difference between the hooked model and Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit, is that in the hooked model, there's another phase called as investment, which is an additional step that differentiates from the Power of Habit model. Okay, let's look at the hooked model first. So in a hooked model, you have a trigger, you have an action, you have a variable reward, and you have an investment. An example could be trigger is 6 o'clock in the morning. An action is I go to the coffee maker and boil some coffee for myself. The variable reward I get is the caffeine high, or feeling fresh and awake. Although I highly don't recommend you going into this habit. I am having a hard time getting out of the coffee habit. And finally, the investment is actually going and buying the coffee beans when they're over. Or it could be even like anything that you do after you do the habit and you get the variable reward. It could be like cleaning the coffee mug or keeping the coffee mug in the dishwasher, anything like that. Any additional effort that you're putting from your side to make it easy for the next time to go through this cycle. Okay, that's the hooked model. And a lot of product companies are doing. Facebook tries to apply this model all the time. Twitter tries to apply this model all the time. Okay, so now let's look at hooked model and its application to TDD. In TDD, what is the trigger? When do you actually start going into the TDD cycle? Is when you have a need to solve a problem via code. Okay, and the action that you do, the first thing that you do is like writing a failing test. What is the reward that you get? What is the variable reward? Now let's emphasize variable reward, because the reward that you feel might not be the same every time. It has to vary over various instances. So in TDD, like depending on the problem scope and size, every time you solve and you go through, you write a failing test and you make it pass, the reward or the satisfaction you feel can vary, right? And the final thing that you have to do in order to give something back or as an investment is to refactor the code. And this is the key thing that many people miss when they go through the TDD cycle. They don't really care about refactoring, but this is really, really important. How do you make sure that the code is easier to write tests on later? How do you make sure that the abstractions are clean? All that is very important. In the standard TDD cycle, or the 3 laws of TDD that Uncle Bob puts out, this is not really an explicit step, right? The 3 laws of TDD, where you only write failing tests first, right? You don't write anything apart from the failing test. Compiler failure is also a failure. You don't write anything apart from any production code apart from that to make the failing test pass, etc. That's a good starting point, but that's not it. You have to spend some time refactoring, and this is where the red green refactor cycle is very important in making the TDD habit. Now, as I said, if you want to make this a habit, spend a lot of time refactoring. You start writing a failing test, you write the code, anything that makes it pass, and then you fix it. You make sure that the code is beautifully put, the abstractions are there, you're breaking it into smaller functions and so on. As Kent Beck puts it, make it work, make it right, and then make it fast. In the same spirit, you write a failing test and just make it work, right? Do whatever it takes to get the failing test passing. Then you make it right by putting some time to refactoring. And then after that, you can also spend some time, optimizing for the CPU, writing some benchmarks, etc. to make it fast. So that's it. Hope you all have a good time making TDD a habit. Remember, you write the failing test, you make it pass, and then you spend some time refactoring.